Hi, Emma. Thanks for making time today. I'd like to discuss my upcoming session with Corey, a 10-year-old client that I've been seeing. His assessment results are in, and they point strongly towards his anxiety being a major behavioral factor. And I want to really start addressing that directly, specifically helping him beginning to recognize his own anxiety cycle. So his core beliefs of fear, making mistakes, performance pressure, and worry about disappointing his parents appear to be his main presenting issues here. Reading aloud in class is especially difficult for him, and at home he delays his homework, which becomes highly distressing when it remains unfinished. He's also quite isolated at home after school, with both parents working late and his older brother studying hard at uni. And he's generally left to his own devices, so self-regulation is a bit of a challenge. My working formulation is that anxious predictions, physiological arousal, and avoidance are really reinforcing one another here. So, avoidance reduces distress briefly, but stops him from learning that he can actually cope with these feelings. I do want to keep the formulation open for future sessions too. His SCAS assessment results were consistent with clinically elevated anxiety, but his BRIEF assessment also flagged real difficulties with planning and working memory. So, his executive function demands and limited home support may well be contributing factors here. For the treatment goal, the broader goal is to help Corey feel less controlled by his anxiety and approach challenges with more confidence and flexibility. But for this session specifically, I want him to begin to understand his own anxiety cycle, what sets it off, what his body does, and what his mind says, and what action he does next. And by the end of the session, I want him to be able to identify one anxiety-provoking situation and one point where he can actually interrupt or intervene in the cycle using a strategy like balloon breathing to relax, for example. So the treatment method I've selected is child-focused CBT, since it directly targets the anxious thoughts, the arousal and avoidance in his presentation, and has the strongest evidence base for anxiety more broadly. The way I'm adapting the delivery draws on principles from the established Australian child anxiety programs like Cool Kids, with externalization, gamification, and parent involvement. His own statements like, I'm a failure and I can't let them down, really give a useful starting point for exploring automatic thoughts rather than correcting or interpreting them for him. I really want this session to feel like a creative journey too. So, with Corey playing a role as a detective, leading his own investigation while I assist and guide him. Each activity becomes the next stage in his own investigation, which helping him see how his thoughts and feelings and actions are all connected. This is also a game he can keep exploring at home or at school and in future sessions. A couple of process issues. One key client factor is Corey's fear of having the wrong answer. So he may try to tell me what he thinks I want to hear rather than describe his genuine experience. I want to reduce any sense that he needs to perform for me, particularly because he's already worrying about adults maybe seeing him as a bit of a failure. So I'll address this early on by reminding him that this is not school. There are no right or wrong answers, and giving him choices about how we work to drive it. So I'll also be positioning him as my detective partner rather than the child being assessed. So from my side, I really need to avoid settling too quickly on performance anxiety, parental pressure being, the main causes. Rather than assuming Corey's high achieving family is creating the pressure, I want to tease apart his perceived expectations from what his parents have actually said from what they actually do before drawing any conclusions. I'll also keep factors like executive function demands and limited support active in the formulation as well. So managing this kind of bias is something that I've been actively working on since your previous advice. So let's move on to the session plan. I want to emphasize that rapport needs to be built and maintained throughout the session to regain the engagement. So I'm going to use props and drawing metaphors and play-based elements to really keep the work light and accessible for him. So first, I'm going to begin with a nice, relaxed check-in with Corey and assess sort of how he feels. Then I'm going to introduce the volume dial. So this is a toy prop that I have, which Corey can physically turn up or down from 0 to 10 to show what level he's feeling. We'll use it throughout the session to track his anxiety to help us to not to just rely on words, and it gives him a tool to use at home as well. Next, I'll introduce the detective game. So, with Corey as the lead detective and me as his assistant, asking questions and helping him follow the clues with each activity, building on the last. I might say here, today we're going to play a detective game, if that's all right. We want to investigate how your feelings and thoughts actually work. This keeps things collaborative and gives him an active role in building the formulation. Next, I want to use a shared drawing exercise to introduce the smoke alarm metaphor. Here, Corey draws a simple house and smoke alarm that he then adds some smoke onto the house, and then we'll talk about how the alarm's job is to really keep us safe. And then I'm going to draw a toaster. with some smoke on it coming out, and he can really see that the alarm can obviously go off or overreact when there's no real danger as well, like when it's just burnt toast, for example. So from there, I'll link this to his anxiety. So asking whether he thinks that his own worry alarm might also overreact sometimes, and we'll bring back the volume dial to show how we might turn this down when needed. So this connects to the next step, and which in the next step, I'm going to introduce a relaxation exercise like balloon breathing as a simple way to turn the worry volume down. Corey will place his hands on his stomach, breathing in for 4 counts, like filling a balloon, and breathing out for 4. After 5 breath cycles, we'll check the volume dial again and see what we say. So I might explain here, balloon breathing really helps the body turn the alarm down enough for the detective part of our brain to think clearly rather than worry. Next, we might have a quick break and discuss something generic that he likes before moving on to the next part of the session, where we build the cognitive triangle together, or the thoughts, feelings, actions triangle. So I'll start by drawing 3 stick figures on the whiteboard in a triangle pattern, but I won't connect them yet. So with thoughts at the top and feelings and actions at the bottom. Then we'll choose a clear trigger, like reading aloud in class, and we'll work through it side by side. So what goes through his mind, how it feels in his body, and what action that he does next. So, for example, the thought might be, I'll make a mistake and everyone will think I'm stupid. And the feeling might be anxious or racing heart or tight stomach. And then the action he might do might be try to avoid the teacher or the task, or if he has to do it, speak really softly when reading. Then I'll hand Corey the marker so he can connect 3 figures in the triangle pattern shape and seeing how each part influences each other. Then we'll move on to reframing. We'll explore that automatic thought and help Corey really find a more balanced alternative for himself. I won't correct him here, but I'll guide him towards cognitive reappraisal, showing how changing the thought can shift the feeling and the action too. So, for example, we might change the thought from, I'll make a mistake, everyone think I'm stupid, to it's okay, everyone makes a mistake sometimes, it's no big deal, and that sort of thing. And then we'll move on to the behavior response or his action. So we'll look at what Corey usually does and how it reduces anxiety for him in the short term, but it actually maintains it over time and makes it bigger. Then we'll agree on one small alternative action, like slowing down and the task and just attempting one little part of it, like the first sentence, and breaking it into smaller, achievable tasks. I also want to show Corey something really important here, which is that the thought isn't the only thing that we can change in the triangle. Sometimes changing the action itself can shift how he feels. So even before the thought has changed. So if he does something physical, like riding his bike, that can reset his mood and give him perspective. This sort of gives him a second entry point to the triangle for him to understand it better, and also to be able to influence those negative feelings he has by doing something different. And then to wrap up, we'll briefly retrace the clues that we found together. So I might say, today we worked out what your worry alarm is trying to do, what turns it up, and how to turn it down a bit, and also what happens in your thoughts and your body and your actions. I'll also reinforce his effort here directly. So, saying like, you notice things nobody else can notice for you, and that makes you the most important detective in this case. His take-home detective task is simply just to notice a time when his worry alarm gets loud. Try balloon breathing and notice what happens to the alarm. I'll also ask Corey at this point if it's okay for a parent to join us for the final few minutes, framing them as joining the detective mission to help him rather than them sort of coming in to take over. I need to be really careful here, though, obviously, as he may not want them to join just yet, and I'll respect that. However, if he does agree, it will give me a natural opening to gently check what his parents have actually said to him about their expectations rather than my assumptions. So in closing, what ties this all together for me is that everything in this session is really working on the same cycle from different angles. The props give Corey a language for his anxiety without needing to name it directly. The metaphor gives him a non-threatening way to understand why it's happening. And the triangle and behavioral piece start giving him some actual leverage over it, whether that's through thought or action. I think that's important given how guarded he's been, and no single piece is asking too much of him on his own. Look, I'd really value your thoughts here, Emma. Particularly on whether that sequencing feels right, giving our existing report with him, and whether the parent check-in is appropriately collaborative or rather than overstepping, and whether it's realistic to fit all this into a 50-minute session. I'd also welcome your guidance on how to sequence the anxiety and the executive functioning threads across the next sessions ahead. Thanks for your time.